The Cathedral of St. Alareth had never witnessed such a spectacle. 500 guests filled the ancient pews, their silks and satins rustling like autumn leaves as they craned their necks toward the massive oak doors. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, their light dancing across jeweled throats and embroidered waistcoats. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, depicting saints and martyrs, casting pools of crimson and gold across the marble floor where Aldrich Vance, the Duke of Ashworth, stood waiting for his bride. He looked every inch the aristocrat, tall, golden-haired, jaw sharp enough to cut glass. His ceremonial coat was embroidered with the Ashworth crest, a silver falcon clutching a rose, and diamonds glittered at his cuffs. To the assembled guests, he appeared the picture of noble perfection, a man who had everything and deserved even more. But those who looked closely might have noticed the tightness around his eyes, the way his smile never quite reached them, the slight tremor in his hands as he adjusted his cravat for the third time, the barely perceptible twitch at the corner of his mouth whenever the doors creaked. The organ swelled with the opening notes of the processional, and a collective sigh of anticipation rippled through the congregation. Lady Venetia Hargrove appeared at the cathedral entrance, resplendent in ivory silk and Valenciennes lace that had cost her father a small fortune. A cathedral-length veil trailed behind her, held by two young cousins who struggled to keep pace. She was beautiful, wealthy, and most importantly, from a family renowned for their fertility. 6 children her mother had borne, all healthy and strong. 7 for her grandmother. The Hargrove women were breeding stock of the highest caliber. This bride would give him heirs. This bride would not fail him. Venetia had taken precisely 4 steps down the aisle, her face radiant with the joy of a young woman about to marry the most eligible duke in England, when the cathedral doors burst open behind her with a thunderous crash. Every head turned. A woman stood silhouetted against the afternoon sun, her figure slim but commanding in a gown of deep sapphire blue that put every other dress in the cathedral to shame. Her dark hair was swept up in an elaborate style that spoke of expert hands and unlimited resources, and diamonds glittered at her throat. Real diamonds, not the paste jewels that many society ladies secretly wore. In each arm, she held a child. 2 children. Twins with unmistakable golden hair that caught the light like spun gold, and gray eyes, those distinctive Vance gray eyes that matched perfectly the man standing frozen at the altar. A collective gasp rippled through the congregation, followed by whispers that spread like wildfire through dry brush. "I do apologize for the interruption," the woman said, her voice carrying effortlessly through the stunned silence, with the practiced projection of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "But I thought His Grace might want to meet his children before he makes another terrible mistake." Aldrich's face had gone the color of old parchment. His mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to force out a single word. "Cressida," he breathed. She smiled, and there was nothing warm in it, nothing soft. It was the smile of a woman who had walked through fire and emerged not burned, but forged into something harder and more dangerous than before. "Your Grace, or should I say, my former husband." She lifted one of the twins slightly, letting the cathedral's golden light fall fully on the child's distinctive features. "I believe you remember casting me out 3 years ago for being barren." She paused, savoring the moment. It appears the physicians were mistaken. Or perhaps the problem was never with me at all. Whispers exploded through the cathedral like wildfire. A man stepped up beside Cressida, tall and dark-haired with an air of authority that made even the most powerful nobles present shrink slightly in their seats. He was broad-shouldered and handsome, with the bearing of someone born to command armies and negotiate with kings. He wore the ceremonial regalia of a title that outranked everyone in that room, including the groom. "Allow me to introduce my wife," he said, his deep voice cutting through the chaos like a blade through silk. "Her Royal Highness, Cressida, Archduchess of Valdrin. And these are our children, whom I have formally acknowledged as my heirs." The cathedral erupted into chaos, and as Cressida watched her former husband's world collapse around him, she allowed herself to remember how it had all begun. 3 years earlier, the morning of her 22nd birthday, Cressida Vance, Duchess of Ashworth, woke to an empty bed and a cold hearth. This was not unusual. In the 18 months of her marriage, she had grown accustomed to Aldrich's absences, his unexplained nights away from their chambers, his increasingly distant manner whenever they did share a meal or a conversation. What she had not grown accustomed to, what she feared she would never grow accustomed to, was the hollow ache in her chest that greeted her each morning, the growing certainty that she had made a terrible mistake in accepting his proposal. She rose and dressed herself, no longer bothering to ring for her lady's maid. Aldrich had dismissed most of the staff who had been loyal to her, replacing them with servants who reported her every movement, every visitor, every letter back to him. Privacy had become a luxury she could not afford, and independence a distant memory. The face that greeted her in the mirror was thinner than it had been on her wedding day. The rosy glow of a hopeful bride had faded, replaced by a pallor that no amount of pinching could correct. Shadows lingered beneath her hazel eyes, speaking of sleepless nights spent staring at canopied ceilings, wondering where her husband was and whom he was with. Her dark hair, once her pride, had lost some of its luster. She was not yet 23, but she felt decades older. She had tried so hard to be a good wife. She had studied household management until she could recite menus and servant schedules in her sleep. She had learned which topics pleased Aldrich and which made him withdraw into cold silence. She had dressed according to his preferences, spoken according to his wishes, moved through his world like a ghost, trying desperately to become solid. None of it had mattered. Cressida had come to this marriage with hope, if not love. The Ashworth Duchy was powerful and ancient, its estate sprawling across 3 counties, its influence reaching into the highest levels of government. And Aldrich had seemed charming during their brief courtship, attentive, witty, quick to compliment her intelligence and admire her accomplishments. Her father, Baron Whitmore, had been delighted by the match, a duke for his eldest daughter. What more could a minor nobleman want for his child? What more indeed? The first cracks had appeared on their wedding night, when Aldrich's charm had evaporated like morning mist under harsh sunlight. He had performed his marital duties with clinical efficiency, as if checking items off a ledger, then left her alone in the vast ducal bed without a word of tenderness. No whispered endearments, no gentle touch, just cold sheets and colder silence. "You are here to produce heirs," he had told her the next morning over breakfast, not even looking up from his newspaper. "Let us not pretend this is anything more than a business arrangement. You will have your household allowance, your position in society, your comfortable life. In exchange, you will give me sons. That is the extent of our relationship." She had told herself it would improve, that once she gave him a child, once she proved her worth, he would soften toward her. She had heard stories of marriages that began coldly, but warmed over time. She had prayed every night for her courses to stop, for the blessing of new life that would transform her from a disappointment into a success. But month after month, her body betrayed her. Her courses came with cruel regularity, and with each passing moon, Aldrich grew colder. His absences grew longer. His comments grew sharper. The servants whispered about his mistress in town, a widow of questionable reputation, who reportedly laughed at his jokes and never mentioned children. On the morning of her birthday, Cressida made her way to the breakfast room, expecting to find it empty as usual. Instead, she found her husband seated at the head of the table with a stranger, a thin man in physician's robes whose eyes held the flat, mercenary gleam of someone who had long ago sold his soul for coin. "Ah, there you are." Aldrich did not rise at her entrance. He never did anymore. His eyes remained fixed on the documents before him, as if she were merely a servant come to refill his coffee. "Sit down. Dr. Pemberton has something to discuss with you." A chill ran down Cressida's spine, but she kept her composure, seating herself with the dignity her mother had taught her before she died. Whatever was coming, she would face it with grace. "Good morning, Your Grace. Doctor." She nodded to each in turn, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, which she hid beneath the table. "I was not aware we had scheduled a medical consultation." "I scheduled it." Aldrich's tone brooked no argument. "Given your continued failure to conceive, I thought it prudent to seek professional medical opinion regarding your condition." Her cheeks flushed with humiliation. To discuss such intimate matters so coldly, so clinically, with a stranger present, it was beyond the pale, even for Aldrich, even for a husband who viewed his wife as little more than a broodmare. "Your Grace," she began carefully, fighting to keep her voice level. "Surely this is a conversation better held in private." "Why? So you can continue making excuses?" Aldrich's eyes were chips of gray ice when they finally met hers. "No, Cressida. I want answers. And I want them now. I have waited 18 months for you to fulfill your most basic duty, and my patience is at an end." He turned to the physician. "Dr. Pemberton, your assessment." The physician cleared his throat, still not meeting Cressida's eyes. He shuffled the papers before him with nervous fingers, as if the documents themselves could shield him from the cruelty of the moment. "Based on my examination of the Duchess's medical history, and the information provided by His Grace," he began, his voice thin and reedy, "I believe the Duchess suffers from a fundamental physiological deficiency. Her womb is inhospitable to life, hostile to the natural processes of conception. She is, in medical terms, barren, incapable of bearing children." The word landed like a physical blow, driving the air from Cressida's lungs. Barren, the most damning word that could be applied to a wife. The ultimate failure, the unforgivable sin. "That cannot be," Cressida whispered, her voice barely audible even to her own ears. "We have only been married 18 months. My mother took 2 years to conceive me, and she went on to bear 4 healthy children. These things take time. Surely, my mother conceived within 3 months of her wedding," Aldrich interrupted flatly, "as did her mother before her, and her mother before that. The Vance bloodline is strong and fertile. We do not struggle with such matters. The deficiency clearly lies with you." Cressida turned to the physician, desperate for some shred of hope. "Surely there are treatments, remedies, waters to take, or special diets. I have heard of women thought barren, who later conceived healthy children through various—" "Doctor," Pemberton shook his head with exaggerated regret that didn't reach his flat, calculating eyes. "I am afraid the condition is permanent and irreversible, Your Grace. Nothing can be done. Medical science has its limits, and in this case, those limits have been reached. You will never bear children." She knew in that moment, with absolute certainty, that this examination had been a farce, that Aldrich had paid this man, paid him handsomely no doubt, to deliver a verdict that had been decided long before any consultation took place. The physician had never examined her, had never asked her questions about her health or her history. He had simply memorized his lines and delivered them on cue. But knowing it and proving it were very different things. And what court would believe a wife over a duke and his paid physician? "Aldrich," she said, using his Christian name deliberately, reaching for any remaining shred of connection between them. Please, let us seek another opinion. Let us try the waters at Bath, or consult with specialists in London. I have heard stories of women who— Enough! His voice cracked like a whip, silencing her. For a moment, something passed across his features. Doubt, perhaps, or guilt, or even a shadow of the charm he had once shown her during their courtship. Then it vanished, replaced by cold determination. The matter is settled. Dr. Pemberton, thank you for your time. My secretary will see to your fee. A generous one, I think, for services so thoroughly rendered. The physician departed with unseemly haste, clutching his payment voucher like a shield against his own conscience. Cressida sat frozen in her chair, trying to process what was happening. The breakfast she had not touched sat cooling before her, as cold and unappetizing as her future. What happens now? She asked quietly, dreading the answer. Aldrich rose from his chair, straightening his coat with precise, practiced movements. Now, we discuss your future. Or, rather, your lack of one in this household. The coldness in his voice made her blood freeze in her veins. I have consulted with my solicitors at length, he continued, pacing before the windows, as if delivering a business presentation rather than destroying his wife's life. And while divorce remains unfortunately complicated, the scandal would be tiresome for everyone involved. There are provisions for separation when a wife fails in her primary duty. You will be removed from Ashworth House by week's end. A small cottage has been prepared for you in the Northern Territories. Remote, quiet, far from society's prying eyes. Appropriate for a woman in your circumstances. Cressida rose on shaking legs, gripping the edge of the table for support. You cannot simply banish me. I am your wife. I have rights under the law. You have nothing. For the first time, real emotion crept into Aldrich's voice. Contempt so thick she could taste it, bitter as poison on her tongue. You came to this marriage with a modest dowry and an adequate bloodline. Nothing more. You were supposed to give me heirs. Strong sons to carry on the Ashworth name. Daughters to forge alliances with other noble houses. You have failed in this single simple task. Therefore, you are of no further use to me. And if I refuse to go quietly, if I demand my rights as your wife— Aldrich smiled, and it was the most frightening expression she had ever seen on a human face. It was the smile of a predator who has cornered its prey and is simply deciding how to deliver the killing blow. Then I will make your failure very, very public. I will drag your name through every salon and drawing room in the kingdom. I will ensure that your father's business ventures mysteriously encounter difficulties. His shipping contracts will dry up. His investments will sour. Your younger sisters, Marjorie, isn't it, and the little ones, will find themselves unmarriageable, tainted by association with you. Is that what you want, Cressida? To destroy your entire family because you're too proud to accept the consequences of your own inadequacy? She stared at him, truly seeing him for the first time since their wedding day. This was not a man who had been disappointed by circumstance. This was not a husband grieving the children they might never have. This was a man who had been waiting for an excuse, any excuse, to rid himself of an unwanted wife. The barrenness diagnosis was convenient, but if it hadn't been that, it would have been something else. Her conversation was too dull. Her manners were too provincial. Her hair was the wrong shade of brown. She had never had a chance. The marriage had been doomed from the moment she signed the registry. The household staff will be informed of your departure this afternoon, Aldrich continued briskly, as if discussing changes to the garden plantings. I suggest you begin packing your personal effects immediately. You may take your clothing and any items you brought from your father's house. Everything else remains Ashworth property. including, his eyes flickered to her hand with cold satisfaction, your wedding rings. Cressida looked down at the diamonds that had once seemed so beautiful, symbols of her new status as a duchess, proof that she had made something of herself. Now they felt like shackles, like chains she had willingly clasped around her own wrists. With trembling fingers, she removed them, the engagement ring with its massive central stone, the wedding band with its channel of smaller diamonds, and placed them on the breakfast table with a soft click. There, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Is there anything else you wish to strip from me, Your Grace? My dignity, perhaps? My hope? Or have you already taken those? Something dangerous flashed in Aldrich's eyes. Do not test me, Cressida. I am being remarkably generous under the circumstances. Another man might have had you committed to an asylum for hysterical women. Facilities for wives who have disappointed their husbands exist in abundance, and the conditions there are not pleasant. At least I am allowing you to retain your freedom, limited though it may be. An asylum? The threat hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Cressida understood then exactly how precarious her position was. A wife had few rights under the law. A wife deemed mentally unfit had none at all. Aldrich could, if he chose, lock her away somewhere she would never be found. Somewhere she would slowly go mad from isolation and despair. She had to leave. She had to survive. And someday, somehow, she would make him pay for this. I will be gone by week's end, she said quietly, pouring every ounce of dignity she possessed into those simple words. As you wish. Aldrich nodded, satisfied that his victory was complete. See that you are. And Cressida? Do not attempt to contact your father or sisters before you leave. I will be monitoring all correspondence from this house. The story I tell them will be simplified, for everyone's benefit. He left her standing alone in the breakfast room, surrounded by the remnants of a meal she had never touched, on a birthday no one had remembered. That afternoon, the household was informed that the Duchess was suffering from a severe nervous condition and would be retiring to the country for her health. Servants who had once curtsied to her now avoided her eyes. Her lady's maid, one of Aldrich's appointees, packed her belongings with barely concealed satisfaction, taking care to handle everything roughly. On the third day, her father arrived. Barren Whitmore was shown to the small sitting room, where Cressida had been essentially imprisoned since the announcement. He looked older than she remembered, so much older. His hair had gone grayer, his shoulders more stooped, his eyes more tired. The prosperous merchant who had dreamed of noble connections for his daughters seemed diminished somehow, as if the weight of his ambitions had finally become too heavy to bear. Father. She rose to embrace him, desperate for some comfort, some reassurance that she was not entirely alone. But something in his expression stopped her cold. Is it true? He asked without preamble, without even a greeting. What His Grace has told me. That you are. That you cannot. I don't know, Cressida said honestly. A physician said so, but I have strong reason to believe he was paid to deliver that verdict regardless of the truth. He never properly examined me, Father. He simply... Her father's face contorted with frustration, and something that looked terribly like disappointment. Cressida, for God's sake, this is not the time for accusations and conspiracy theories. The Duke of Ashworth has been more than fair in his dealings with our family. He has agreed not to pursue divorce, which would ruin us all socially and financially. He has provided you with a home and a small allowance. All he asks is that you go quietly, without making a scene that would embarrass everyone involved. All he asks, Cressida repeated hollowly. Father, he is casting me out like refuse. He is destroying my reputation with lies. And you think he is being fair? I think, her father said slowly, not meeting her eyes, that you need to consider your family, your younger sisters. Marjorie is 17. She will be making her debut next season, and she has excellent prospects if nothing interferes. If there is scandal attached to the Whitmore name, if you make this difficult, her chances at a good match will be ruined. Is that what you want? To drag your sisters down with you, out of wounded pride? Cressida stared at him, feeling the last fragile pillar of her support crumbling into dust. You are taking his side, she whispered. Your own daughter. And you are taking his side. I'm being practical. Something you would do well to learn, Cressida. Practicality has kept this family afloat through difficult times, and practicality will see us through this as well. Barren Whitmore straightened his coat, still refusing to meet her eyes. Go to the cottage. Live quietly. Perhaps in time, when the gossip dies down, when Aldrich has secured his heir through other means, we can revisit the situation. But for now, you must think of others besides yourself. He left without embracing her, without wishing her a happy birthday, without even saying goodbye. On the morning of her departure, Cressida rose before dawn. She dressed in her simplest traveling clothes, a gray wool dress that she had brought from her father's house years ago, the only gown Aldrich's servants had deemed unsuitable to remain as Ashworth property. She had one small trunk of personal items, a few books that had belonged to her mother's prayer book with its worn leather cover, a miniature portrait of her sisters in a silver frame, letters from happier times, tied with a faded blue ribbon. Nothing of real value. Nothing that would fetch more than a few shillings at a pawnshop. Nothing that mattered to anyone but her. The carriage that waited for her was plain and unmarked, without the ducal crest that would identify it as belonging to Ashworth House. Even in banishment, appearances had to be maintained. No one could know that the Duchess of Ashworth was being sent away in disgrace. The fiction of a nervous condition and a rest cure had to be preserved. As she descended the grand staircase for the last time, Cressida passed through the portrait gallery, where generations of Vance ancestors stared down from gilded frames. Proud men with Aldrich's cold gray eyes, fertile women surrounded by children, 3, 4, 5, 6 children clustering around their mother's skirts like flowers around a maypole, a legacy she had been unable to continue. At the bottom of the stairs, she paused. Aldrich stood in the entrance hall, dressed for riding. He was going hunting, she realized with a flash of bitter understanding. On the morning he banished his wife, he was going hunting, as though it were any ordinary day, as though her entire world hadn't just collapsed. I trust everything is in order, he said coolly, adjusting his riding gloves. Cressida looked at him. This man she had married with such hope. This man she had tried so desperately to please. This man who had never seen her as anything more than a vessel for his heirs, and felt nothing but cold, clarifying rage. I will remember this, she said quietly. Every moment of it. Every cruelty. Every lie. And someday, Aldrich, you will regret what you have done to me. He laughed, a short, dismissive sound that echoed through the marble hall. Threats from a barren woman. How terrifying. Safe travels, Cressida. Do try not to embarrass the family name any further. She walked past him without another word, her head held high, despite the tears burning behind her eyes. She climbed into the plain carriage, settled herself on the hard seat, and did not look back as Ashworth House, that magnificent prison, disappeared behind her. She was 22 years old, disgraced, abandoned by her husband and her father alike, cast out with nothing but a small trunk and whatever remained of her shattered pride. She had no way of knowing that everything was about to change. The carriage traveled north for 3 days, Cressida watched the landscape change through the small, grimy window, green fields giving way to rolling moorland, then to forests so dense and ancient that the sunlight barely penetrated their canopy. The further north they went, the wilder the country became, as if civilization itself was retreating behind them. The driver spoke to her only when absolutely necessary, his manner sullen and resentful, as if transporting a disgraced duchess was beneath his dignity. The inns where they stopped for the night were mean, cheerless places, rooms with damp sheets and questionable food, far below the standard she had grown accustomed to as a duchess. But what struck her most was the way she was regarded, with suspicion, with barely concealed contempt, as if word of her disgrace had somehow traveled ahead of her. News traveled fast, it seemed. Or perhaps the driver had been instructed to ensure her journey was as unpleasant as possible, to break her spirit before she even reached her exile. On the morning of the fourth day, Cressida woke to find she could not rise from her bed. The room spun around her in dizzying circles. Her stomach heaved violently, though she had eaten almost nothing the night before. The questionable stew had smelled of rot, and she had pushed it away untouched. A cold sweat broke out across her skin, soaking through her nightgown, and her body felt as though it belonged to someone else entirely. "We leave in an hour," the driver shouted through her door, his voice harsh and impatient. "His Grace's orders. No delays for any reason." Cressida tried to call back, to explain that she was desperately unwell, but the words would not come. Her throat was too dry, her strength too depleted. She managed to drag herself to the wash basin before being violently sick, and then her legs gave out entirely. She lay on the cold, dirty floor of that miserable room, too weak to move, too ill to cry out for help, and wondered if this was how her story would end. "This is how I die," she thought with strange calm. Alone in a roadside inn, abandoned by everyone who should have cared for me. They'll find my body in a few days, and Aldrich will shake his head sadly and say it was the nervous condition that killed me. How convenient for everyone. But death, it seemed, had other plans. The door burst open some time later, hours perhaps, or minutes. She had lost all sense of time. "Good God," a woman's voice exclaimed, sharp with alarm. "She's collapsed on the floor. Fetch the physician immediately, and send word to His Highness. Tell him we've found someone who needs help." Hands lifted her from the floor, gentle but strong. She was placed on the bed, and cool cloths were pressed to her fevered forehead. Voices swirled around her, concerned, urgent, speaking words she couldn't quite grasp through the fog of illness. Traveling alone, in this condition? It's madness. Send word to His Highness immediately. He'll want to know. Needs proper care, not some country cottage miles from anywhere. Who sent this poor creature out in such a state? Cressida tried to speak, to explain, to ask who these people were and why they were helping her when everyone else had abandoned her. But darkness claimed her before she could form the words. When she woke again, everything had changed. She was no longer in the dingy inn with its damp walls and suspicious stains. The room around her was large and bright, with tall windows draped in cream silk that let in streams of golden afternoon light. A fire crackled cheerfully in an elegant marble hearth, casting dancing shadows across walls, papered in a delicate floral pattern. The bed beneath her was soft, softer than anything she had slept on, even at Ashworth House, and the linens were crisp white cotton that smelled of lavender and sunshine. And sitting in a chair beside her bed, doing needlework with the calm concentration of someone who had nothing more pressing to attend to, was a woman of perhaps 60 years of age. She had silver hair arranged in an elaborate style that spoke of expert ladies' maids and unlimited time. Her gown was deep purple silk, elegant but comfortable, the kind of dress worn by someone who no longer needed to impress anyone. Her hands were adorned with rings that sparkled in the firelight, Not gaudy, but quietly magnificent. And her eyes, when she looked up from her embroidery, were the kindest blue Cressida had ever seen. "Ah," the woman said, setting aside her needlework with evident satisfaction. "You're awake. Excellent. I was beginning to worry we'd lost you. You've been unconscious for nearly 2 days. Where?" Cressida's voice came out as a croak. Her throat was parched, her lips cracked. "Where am I?" "Valdren Castle," the woman replied, rising to pour a glass of water from a crystal decanter. She held it to Cressida's lips, supporting her head while she drank. "You collapsed at the Golden Stag Inn, which happens to be on my son's lands. The innkeeper had the good sense to send word to the castle rather than simply leaving you to die in that dreadful room, which I suspect was your original escort's preference. Dreadful man, that driver. We sent him on his way with a flea in his ear and a strong suggestion that he never show his face in Valdren territory again." "Your son's lands?" Cressida's mind struggled to process this information through the lingering fog of illness. "Honoria Castellan, Dowager Archduchess of Valdren." The woman smiled warmly at Cressida's expression of shock. Yes, that Valdren. The sovereign archduchy that has maintained its independence for 3 centuries through a combination of strategic alliances, geographical advantages, and a certain willingness to make life very difficult for anyone who tries to meddle in our affairs. We answer only to the crown itself, and even that relationship is more collegial than hierarchical. We are quite outside the reach of English dukes here, I assure you. Cressida had heard of Valdren, of course. Everyone had. A small but wealthy territory nestled in the mountainous border region. It had maintained its independence for centuries through a combination of strategic marriages, formidable natural defenses, and an army that punched far above its weight. The Archduke of Valdren was said to be one of the most powerful men in Europe, outranking all but royalty itself, and she was lying in his castle, being tended to by his mother. "Why would you help me?" she asked, her voice still weak but steadier now. "You don't know me. I'm nobody. Less than nobody, apparently. A disgraced duchess being shipped off to exile. You are a woman who has been cruelly wronged by a man who should have protected you," Honoria said simply, as if this were the most obvious thing in the world. "In my experience, that is reason enough to offer assistance. Besides," she added with a hint of mischief in her blue eyes, "I have a particular distaste for Aldrich Vance. He visited Valdren several years ago, before your marriage, and attempted to court my niece. His behavior during that visit was revealing. Let us simply say that I am not sorry to inconvenience him. The gossip has reached you then, about my condition. My dear, everyone knows. The Duke of Ashworth's barren wife, sent away in disgrace for failing to produce an heir. A tragic tale, if one believes the official version." Honoria's expression turned serious, which I must confess, I do not. Not for a moment. Why not? Because I have met Aldrich Vance, and I know precisely the sort of man he is. The sort who would manufacture a convenient diagnosis to rid himself of an inconvenient wife. The sort who would blame others for his own potential shortcomings. Honoria paused, studying Cressida with those sharp, kind eyes. "Also, because you are quite clearly not barren." Cressida stared at her, certain she must have misheard. "What?" "My physician examined you while you were unconscious. I hope you'll forgive the liberty. I know it was intrusive. But you were quite desperately ill, and we needed to understand why in order to treat you properly." Honoria reached over to pat her hand. "You are approximately 2 months with child, my dear. Congratulations." The room tilted around her, though she was lying perfectly still. Pregnant. She was pregnant. All those months of trying, all those prayers, All those tears shed in the darkness when her courses came yet again. And she had been pregnant all along, had perhaps even conceived in those final cold encounters with Aldrich, when he had performed his duties with such obvious distaste. She had been pregnant when that horrible doctor declared her barren. "That's not possible," she whispered. "The physician said the physician was either grossly incompetent or deliberately lying. Given what I know of Aldrich Vance's character and resources, I strongly suspect the latter." Honoria's voice was gentle but firm. "A man who wants to rid himself of a wife without the scandal of divorce needs grounds. Barrenness is convenient grounds. A paid physician willing to provide a false diagnosis is merely an expense, and not a particularly large one, for a duke." Cressida pressed her hands to her still flat stomach, trying to comprehend this new reality that had suddenly opened before her like an unexpected door. A child. Aldrich's child. Growing inside her even as he cast her out, even as he declared her worthless, even as he planned to replace her with a more fertile model. "I have to tell him," she said automatically, the words leaving her mouth before she could think them through. "If he knows, if he realizes the diagnosis was wrong, he will what?" Honoria interrupted gently. "Take you back? Apologize for his cruelty? Suddenly transform into the loving husband he has never been?" She shook her head, silver hair catching the firelight. "My dear Lady Cressida, I have lived a long time and known many men like Aldrich Vance. They do not change. They do not improve. They simply find new victims and new excuses. If you return to him pregnant, he will not suddenly value you. He will simply find new ways to control and torment you. He will watch your every move, monitor your every meal, and ensure that you produce his heir under conditions of absolute imprisonment. And once the child is born, once he has what he wants, what need would he have of you then?" Cressida thought about that, about Aldrich's cold eyes and colder heart, about the driver who had been instructed to ensure her journey was difficult, perhaps even to ensure she didn't survive it, about the lonely cottage in the remote northern territories, where no one would hear her scream. "No," she said slowly. "No, I don't want to go back. Sensible girl. I knew I liked you." Honoria's smile was warm and genuine. "Then here is what I propose. You will remain at Valdren Castle as my guest until you have recovered your strength and decided what you wish to do with your future. No one will bother you here. No one will report your whereabouts. The Duke of Ashworth has no authority on Valdren lands, and my son outranks him considerably in the broader European hierarchy. You are safe here. Your son, the Archduke, does he know I'm here?" "He does. I wrote to him immediately when you first arrived, explaining the situation in detail. He is currently in the capital handling some diplomatic matters, but he has expressed his full support for offering you sanctuary." Honoria's eyes twinkled. He also expressed some rather colorful opinions about Aldrich Vance that I won't repeat in polite company. Suffice to say, you have an ally in my son, Lady Cressida, and the Castellans are not allies one takes lightly. The man who entered her sitting room 3 weeks later, once she had recovered enough strength to receive visitors, was nothing like what Cressida had expected. She had imagined the Archduke of Valdren would be old, perhaps, softened by decades of luxury, or pompous, puffed up with his own importance, like so many powerful men she had known, or cold and calculating, viewing her as a pawn in some political game she didn't understand. Instead, Stellan Castellan was perhaps 35 years of age, with dark hair touched with distinguished silver at the temples, and eyes the color of deep forest pools, green with flecks of gold that caught the light when he smiled. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the physique of a man who spent his time outdoors, riding and hunting, rather than simply posturing in ballrooms. His face was handsome but not pretty, marked by laugh lines around his eyes, and a small scar above his left eyebrow that spoke of a life lived fully rather than cautiously. Most striking of all was his manner. He moved with the easy confidence of someone born to power, yes, but without the arrogance she had come to expect from men of high rank. When he bowed over her hand, the gesture felt genuine rather than performative. "Lady Cressida," he said, his voice warm with what seemed like sincere pleasure. "Thank you for agreeing to receive me. I hope my mother hasn't been too overwhelming in her hospitality. She has strong opinions about everything, and absolutely no compunction about sharing them. Despite everything, despite the illness, despite the fear, despite the uncertain future stretching before her, Cressida felt herself smile. Her grace has been nothing but kind. I owe her my life, quite literally. Yes, she mentioned that your previous escort seemed content to leave you dying in a ditch." Something dark flickered across Stellan's handsome features. "I've made inquiries about that driver. He was in the Duke of Ashworth's personal employ for many years, and I have reason to believe he was under explicit instructions to ensure your journey was as difficult as possible, perhaps even to ensure you didn't survive it." Cressida's blood chilled. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed, having her darkest fears validated by someone with the resources to investigate properly, was something else entirely. "Then I am doubly grateful for your mother's intervention," she said quietly. "As am I." Stellan settled into the chair across from her, crossing one long leg over the other with casual grace. "Lady Cressida, may I speak frankly with you? I find I have little patience for the usual social dancing around difficult subjects. I would prefer it, Your Highness. I have had quite enough of polite fictions to last a lifetime." "Then let me say this plainly." His green eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I know what Aldrich Vance has told the world about you. Barren, unstable, a disappointment. The official narrative paints you as a failed wife being mercifully sent away for rest and recovery. And I know what I see sitting before me, which is something else entirely." He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "I see a woman who has endured tremendous cruelty with her dignity intact. A woman who is clearly intelligent, clearly resilient, and clearly the victim of a calculated campaign to destroy her reputation and dispose of her quietly." She felt moisture gathering in her eyes. She had not realized until that moment how desperately she needed someone to see the truth, to look past the official story and recognize the injustice that had been done to her. "Lady Cressida," Stellan continued, leaning forward slightly, "I should like to offer you my formal protection. Not charity, I want to be clear about that, and not pity, which I suspect you would find insulting. A formal arrangement that will shield you from Ashworth's reach and give you the security you need to raise your child in peace." "Protection?" Her voice wavered despite her best efforts. "What kind of protection?" "You could remain here at Valdrin Castle as my mother's official companion. It's a respectable position, one that would explain your presence and give you standing in both Valdrin and broader European society. The child, when it arrives, would be under the protection of the Castellan family. Ashworth could not touch either of you without effectively declaring war on a sovereign territory. It was more than she had dared hope for. Safety, security, a future for her child that didn't depend on Aldrich's uncertain mercy or her own desperate improvisation. "Why would you do this?" she asked, needing to understand. "You don't know me. You have no obligation to help. This could create diplomatic complications with Ashworth, with England." Stellan smiled, and it transformed his face from merely handsome to something far more compelling. "Let me worry about Ashworth. The man is a bully, and bullies only understand strength. As for why," he shrugged, a surprisingly casual gesture for an archduke. I believe in justice. What was done to you was unjust. I have the power to correct that injustice, so I will. It's as simple as that." It wasn't simple at all, and they both knew it. But looking into his steady green eyes, Cressida felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Trust. "I accept," she said, with more gratitude than I can possibly express. "Then welcome to Valdren, Lady Cressida. I suspect things are about to get very interesting." The months that followed were unlike anything Cressida had experienced in her entire life. At Valdren Castle, she was treated not as a disgraced duchess or a charity case, but as a valued member of the household. Honoria included her in social calls and charitable works, introducing her to the leading ladies of Valdren society as "my dear young friend who is staying with us for an extended visit." The servants regarded her with genuine respect, addressing her as "my lady," with warmth rather than obligation. And Stellan was everywhere. He joined them for breakfast most mornings, engaging Cressida in discussions about philosophy, literature, and politics that left her mind buzzing with new ideas long after the meal was over. Unlike Aldrich, who had viewed her opinions as nuisances to be tolerated at best, Stellan actually listened to what she had to say. He challenged her thinking, yes, but respectfully, as an intellectual equal rather than an inferior to be corrected. He walked with her in the castle gardens when the weather was fine, adjusting his long stride to match her increasingly awkward gait as her pregnancy progressed. They talked about everything during those walks: his responsibilities as Archduke, her childhood memories, and books they had both loved, places they dreamed of visiting. He made her laugh with dry observations about the absurdities of noble society, and she found herself sharing thoughts she had never voiced to anyone. He sent books to her room, volumes he thought she might enjoy, with notes scribbled in the margins, pointing out passages he found particularly interesting or wanted to discuss with her later. The first time she found a pressed flower tucked between the pages of a poetry collection, she told herself it meant nothing. The second time, with a different flower, she wasn't so sure. He never mentioned her condition with embarrassment or distaste. When her back ached in the later months, special cushions appeared in her favorite chairs without comment. When she craved strange foods at odd hours, pickled herring at midnight, strawberries in winter, they materialized as if by magic. When she woke from nightmares about Aldrich, about dark cottages and hired drivers and lonely deaths, she would find fresh flowers by her bed in the morning, as if someone had known she needed beauty to drive away the darkness. As spring turned to summer and her pregnancy progressed, Cressida found herself looking forward to Stellan's visits with increasing anticipation. His intelligence challenged her. His kindness soothed her. His steady presence made her feel safe, in a way she hadn't experienced since childhood, before her mother died, and her father began viewing his daughters as assets to be traded for social advancement. "He's courting you," Honoria observed one afternoon, watching Cressida read the latest book Stellan had sent, a treatise on natural philosophy with another pressed flower tucked between the pages. "In case you hadn't noticed, which I suspect you have." Cressida looked up, startled. "Don't be absurd. I'm 6 months pregnant with another man's child." "And?" "My son has never cared about convention. If anything, your situation probably appeals to him." Honoria smiled knowingly. A woman who needs rescuing from a villain, a child who needs a father, a chance to do something genuinely good while also spiting a man he despises. Stellan has always preferred complicated solutions to simple ones. He cannot possibly want to marry me. Can't he? I've known my son for 34 years, and I've never seen him behave this way with anyone. The books, the flowers, the way he lights up when you enter a room, as if the sun has suddenly come out from behind clouds. She patted Cressida's hand. "Whether he realizes it consciously yet or not, my dear, Stellan is falling in love with you. In the 7th month of her pregnancy, news arrived from England that changed everything. Aldrich had announced his engagement. Lady Venetia Hargrove, Honoria read from the letter, with her nose wrinkling in distaste. 19 years old, fresh from the schoolroom, from a family known for their fertility. The wedding is scheduled for spring. How predictably unimaginative of him. Cressida received the news with surprising calm. She had known Aldrich would remarry eventually. He needed heirs, and she was no longer his problem. But hearing it confirmed, knowing he was already moving on, as if their marriage had meant nothing, as if she had meant nothing. "Are you all right?" Stellan asked that evening, finding her in the library staring at a book she hadn't actually been reading. "I don't know," she admitted. "I thought I would feel something. Anger, hurt, jealousy, perhaps. But mostly I just feel free." She looked up at him, standing in the doorway with concern written across his handsome features, firelight casting warm shadows across his face. "Yes. Is that strange? He was my husband. I should care that he's replacing me." Stellan moved to sit beside her on the settee, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence, but not quite touching. "It's not strange at all. He was never really your husband, Cressida. Not in any way that matters. He was your captor, your jailer. And captives don't mourn when their captors find new victims. They feel relief that they themselves escaped. That poor girl, Venetia, she doesn't know what she's getting into." "No, she doesn't. But that isn't your responsibility. You survived. That's enough. That's more than enough." She looked at this man who had appeared in her life like something out of a fairy tale. The noble prince who rescues the princess from the tower. Except the tower had been a loveless marriage, and the rescue had been sanctuary rather than sword. "Stellan," she began, not entirely sure what she intended to say. "Cressida." He reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and took her hand in his. His fingers were warm and strong, and something in her chest cracked open at the contact. Some wall she had built to protect herself from further hurt. "I know this isn't the time. I know you're dealing with so much already, and the last thing you need is more complication. But I need you to know that what I feel for you isn't pity, it isn't duty, it isn't some complicated political calculation." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "What is it then?" "I think," he said carefully, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand, "it might be love. Or the beginning of it. I think I've been falling for you since the moment you looked at me with those fierce, hazel eyes and demanded to know why I would help a stranger." "I'm carrying another man's child," she whispered. "My marriage hasn't even been formally dissolved. I come with enough complications to fill a legal library." "I know, and I don't care." His green eyes were intense, sincere, hiding nothing. "The child is innocent of its father's sins. If you allowed it, I would raise it as my own, give it my name, my protection, every advantage I could offer. Not because I want to own you or control you, but because I want to build something with you. A family, a partnership, a life." She felt tears streaming down her face. "You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're brilliant and brave and so much stronger than you give yourself credit for. I know you make me laugh when I least expect it. I know I spend my days looking for excuses to see you, and my nights dreaming about a future where I wake up beside you." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I know I love you, Cressida, whether you're ready to hear that or not." She should say no. She should be practical, cautious, protect herself from another man who might hurt her. Every sensible instinct she possessed screamed at her to pull away, to maintain distance, to guard her battered heart. But she was so tired of being sensible. "I think," she said shakily, "I might love you too." The smile that broke across Stellan's face was like sunrise after the longest, darkest night. "Then that's enough. For now, that's more than enough." The twins were born in the depths of winter, on a night when snow fell thick and silent outside the castle windows. The labor was long and difficult, 18 hours of pain that tested every ounce of strength Cressida possessed. There were moments when she thought she might not survive it, when the midwife's expression grew worried and Honoria's grip on her hand tightened with fear. But Honoria never left her side, murmuring encouragement and wiping her brow and telling her stories about Stellan's birth to distract her from the pain. And outside the door, Stellan paced for 18 straight hours, refusing food, refusing rest, refusing to leave even when servants tried to convince him that such matters were women's business. "I'm not leaving," she heard him say through the heavy oak door. "Not until I know they're both safe. They, not just her. Her and the baby." Already he thought of them as a unit, as his family. 2 cries, as it turned out. "Twins," the midwife announced, exhausted but triumphant. "A boy and a girl, both healthy. Strong lungs on both of them." When Cressida held them for the first time, one in each arm, so small, so perfect, so utterly dependent on her, she felt her heart expand beyond anything she had ever thought possible. They had their father's golden hair, already visible as downy fuzz on their tiny heads. They had his gray eyes, those distinctive Vance eyes, staring up at her with newborn wonder. Aldrich's coloring, Aldrich's children. But they would never know his cruelty. They would never feel his coldness. She would make absolutely certain of that. Stellan was allowed in an hour later, once she had been cleaned up and made presentable. His face when he saw them, the naked wonder, the immediate overwhelming love, erased any lingering doubt she might have harbored. "They're perfect," he murmured, cradling the boy with infinite gentleness while she held the girl. "Cressida, they're absolutely perfect." "They're not yours," she felt compelled to say. "Whatever happens between us, you need to know." "They're yours," he interrupted gently. "Which means, if you'll have me, they're mine too. Every child deserves a father who loves them. Their biological sire forfeited that role when he cast their mother out. I would be honored to fill it." "That sounds suspiciously like a proposal, Your Highness." "It is a proposal." He looked up from the baby, his green eyes serious and sincere. "Marry me, Cressida. Not because you need my protection or my title, but because we love each other, and we've already started building a life together. Let me be your husband in truth. Let me be a father to these children. I'm still technically married to someone else. My lawyers have been working on that for months." A slight smile tugged at his lips. "Aldrich's public declaration that you were barren, combined with his engagement to another woman, while still legally wed to you, constitutes abandonment under Valdrin law. The marriage can be annulled as if it never existed. You would be free. And society? The scandal. I am the Archduke of Valdrin. Society will say whatever I tell them to say." His smile widened. "Besides, the scandal will be largely directed at Ashworth when the truth comes out. A duke who abandoned his pregnant wife, declared her barren to dispose of her conveniently, and then tried to marry another while his own children grew in her womb. No amount of money or influence can make that story flattering." She looked at him. This man who had saved her life and healed her heart and loved her children before they even took their first breaths. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were wed 3 months later, in a private ceremony at Valdrin Castle, with only Honoria and a handful of trusted witnesses present. Cressida wore a gown of deep blue silk. She had worn white once before, for a wedding that had brought her nothing but pain. And Stellan placed a ring on her finger that had belonged to 7 generations of Castellan archduchesses. When the vows were spoken and the documents signed, she was no longer Cressida Vance, disgraced Duchess of Ashworth. She was Cressida Castellan, Archduchess of Voldren, wife to one of the most powerful men in Europe, mother of twins who would be raised as his heirs. And she had never been happier. Meanwhile, back in England, things were not going well for Aldrich Vance. His engagement to Venetia Hargrove had been announced to great fanfare, but whispers were already circulating about the fate of his first wife. The story he had told, about the barren woman sent away for her health, was developing cracks as servants who had been dismissed from Ashworth House found employment elsewhere and began sharing what they had witnessed. But Aldrich remained confident. He was a duke. He had money, power, and connections in every corner of English society. Whatever rumors might circulate, his version of events would ultimately prevail. He had no idea that in a castle far to the north, his discarded wife was nursing his children, while her new husband made plans to destroy him utterly. "The timing will need to be perfect," Stellan said one evening, reviewing documents in his study, while Cressida nursed the twins by the fire. "If we move too soon, Ashworth might find a way to spin the narrative in his favor. Too late, and the marriage to Lady Hargrove will be complete, which complicates the legal situation. You want to humiliate him publicly. It wasn't a question. I want to give you justice." Stellan looked up, his expression serious. "He tried to have you killed, Cressida. The driver confessed everything when my men interrogated him. Ashworth gave explicit instructions that if an opportunity arose during the journey north, it should be taken. You were supposed to die in that inn, alone and abandoned, and no one would ever have known the truth." She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed, having her darkest fears validated, "Then yes," she said quietly, pressing a kiss to her daughter's downy head. "I want justice. I want the world to know what he did. Then the wedding day it is. The moment Lady Hargrove begins her walk down the aisle, we will walk through those cathedral doors. Let all of London society see the Barren woman returned with the children he said she could never bear, and a title that makes his duchy look like a country estate." And so the plans were made. Invitations were acquired through Honoria's extensive network of society connections. A gown was commissioned that would outshine any bride. The twins were prepared for their first public appearance. The day of reckoning was approaching. The Cathedral of St. Alareth loomed before them, its Gothic spires reaching toward a brilliant blue sky. Cressida stood just outside the massive oak doors, listening to the muffled strains of the organ beginning the processional inside. Beside her, Stellan was a calm, reassuring presence, his hand warm at the small of her back. Behind them, the nurse held the twins, Matthias and Seraphine as they had named them, now 18 months old and mercifully calm, their gray eyes wide with curiosity at the grand building before them. "The bride has begun walking," one of Stellan's men reported, slipping back through a side door. "You have perhaps 2 minutes before she reaches the altar." 2 minutes. After everything she had endured, it came down to 2 minutes. "Cressida." Stellan's voice was low, meant only for her. "You don't have to do this. If you've changed your mind, we can leave right now. Return to Voldren. Live our lives in peace, and let Ashworth rot in his own misery without our intervention." She considered it, the quiet life, the safe choice, letting Aldrich marry his new bride and fade into irrelevance while she built her happiness far from his reach. But then she thought of the driver who had been instructed to let her die, of the physician who had lied for money, of her father who had chosen social standing over his own daughter, of all the servants and society ladies who had whispered about the Barren Duchess while she lay broken and alone. They all believed Aldrich's version of events. They all thought she was the failure, the disappointment, the woman who couldn't fulfill her most basic duty. No more. "Open the doors," she said. Light flooded into the cathedral as the massive oak doors swung wide with a thunderous crash that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. The confrontation that followed was everything she had imagined, and more. Aldrich's face drained of all color when he saw her standing there, silhouetted against the afternoon sun like an avenging angel. Lady Venetia froze mid-stride, her ivory gown pooling around her feet, her bouquet trembling in white-knuckled hands. And when Stellan introduced Cressida as the Archduchess of Valdren, with his formally acknowledged heirs in her arms, the cathedral erupted into chaos. "This is outrageous," Aldrich snarled, striding down the aisle toward them with murder in his eyes. "Guards, remove this woman immediately." But no guards moved. They had been rather generously compensated by Stellan's men to remain exactly where they stood. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Ashworth." Stellan stepped forward, positioning himself between Aldrich and Cressida with casual authority. "Your marriage to Lady Cressida was annulled under Valdren law 6 months ago. You publicly stated she was barren. You announced your engagement to another woman while still legally wed. You attempted to have her murdered during her journey into exile." He paused, letting each accusation land like a physical blow. "The documentation has been filed with the appropriate authorities in 3 countries. The children," Aldrich said slowly, his eyes fixed on the golden-haired twins with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. "If they're mine, they are not yours." Cressida's voice was steady as steel, carrying across the silent cathedral with perfect clarity. "You declared me barren, Aldrich. You told all of London society that I could never bear children. You paid a physician to confirm your lie. You cast us out, all 3 of us, though you didn't know it then, and tried to have me killed on the journey." She lifted Matthias slightly, letting the light fall on his unmistakable Vance features. "These children belong to a man who actually wants them." "I have formally acknowledged them as my heirs," Stellan added. "Under Valdren law, they are Castellans in every way that matters. They will inherit my titles, my lands, and my fortune. They will never know the name Vance, except as a cautionary tale about what happens to men who mistreat their wives." The cathedral had erupted into barely contained chaos. Ladies whispered furiously behind their fans, their eyes darting between the confrontation and their neighbors, already composing the letters they would write that evening. Gentlemen exchanged significant looks, recalculating social alliances. Somewhere near the back, a man was scribbling frantically in a notebook, a journalist who would ensure this story appeared in every newspaper in England by morning. And poor Lady Venetia stood forgotten in the middle of the aisle, tears streaming down her lovely face as she watched her fairy tale wedding disintegrate around her. Cressida felt a pang of genuine sympathy for the girl. None of this was her fault. She was simply another victim of Aldrich's manipulation, a pawn in his desperate quest for heirs. "Lady Venetia," Cressida said gently, turning to address the trembling bride. "I am truly sorry you've been caught up in this, but I would urge you to consider very carefully whether you wish to proceed with this marriage. The man waiting at that altar is not what he appears to be. He is cruel, calculating, and entirely willing to destroy anyone who fails to serve his purposes. You deserve far better." "Venetia, darling," Aldrich attempted, his voice strained. "Don't listen to them. This is all lies. Manipulation from a bitter woman who couldn't accept—" "Lies about what?" Cressida interrupted. "That I was barren? Given the 2 children I'm holding, clearly not. That our marriage was unhappy? You made certain of that from the wedding night onward. That you tried to have me killed?" She smiled coldly. "Your driver confessed everything, Aldrich. Under interrogation, he was remarkably forthcoming about your explicit instructions. What little color remained in Aldrich's face drained away entirely. We have his signed confession," Stellan said. "Witnessed and notarized by 3 officials, along with testimony from servants who overheard your discussions, and correspondence between you and the physician who declared Cressida barren, including payment records. Shall I continue? Or would you prefer to hear the rest in front of a magistrate?" Aldrich looked around the cathedral, at the 500 witnesses to his humiliation, at the bride backing away from him with horror in her eyes, at the children who bore his features but would never bear his name. "This isn't over," he hissed through clenched teeth. "I'll fight this. You'll do nothing." Stellan's voice went cold as winter ice. "Because if you attempt to harm my wife or my children in any way, if you spread lies about them, if you so much as speak their names in public, I will destroy you. Not just socially, not just financially. I will use every resource at my disposal to ensure you spend the rest of your miserable life regretting the day you crossed the house of Castellan." The threat hung in the air, all the more terrifying for being delivered in such a calm, measured tone. Cressida stepped forward for the final blow. "I came here to show you what you threw away, Aldrich. The children you'll never know. The wife you'll never have back. The life you could have had if you'd been a better man." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I hope the memory haunts you for the rest of your days." She turned and walked toward the cathedral doors, Stellan at her side, the nurse following with the twins. Behind her, the cathedral exploded into noise, shouting, crying, the thunder of footsteps as guests scrambled to follow or flee or simply get a better view of the carnage. But Cressida didn't look back. She had spent too long looking back already. It was time to look forward. Outside, their carriage waited. As they pulled away from the chaos erupting from the cathedral steps, Stellan took her hand. "How do you feel?" "Free," she said. "I feel completely free." In the cathedral behind them, Lady Venetia Hargrove tore off her veil, threw her bouquet at Aldrich's feet, and declared in a voice that carried to every corner of the building that she would rather die a spinster than marry a monster. And Aldrich Vance, Duke of Ashworth, stood alone at the altar of the grandest cathedral in London, watching his carefully constructed world turn to dust. The scandal was, by universal agreement, the most spectacular London had witnessed in a generation. Within hours of the cathedral confrontation, the story had spread to every corner of the city. By the next morning, it dominated the front page of every newspaper in England. Within a month, there was hardly a salon in Europe where the tale of the Barren Duchess was not being discussed with varying degrees of shock, sympathy, and satisfaction. The narrative that emerged was not kind to Aldrich Vance. Servants who had been dismissed from Ashworth House came forward with stories of his cruelty, his coldness toward his young wife, his calculated campaign to isolate her from friends and family, his obvious delight when she failed to conceive. The physician who had declared Cressida barren was eventually located in Belgium, where he confessed everything in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Letters were produced, witnesses interviewed, evidence compiled. The picture that emerged was damning beyond repair. The consequences came swiftly. Lady Venetia's father filed a lawsuit for breach of promise and fraud. Creditors began calling in debts. Former friends and allies distanced themselves, not wanting to be tainted by association with such scandal. Within a year, Aldrich had retreated to his remaining country property, shunned by society, abandoned by his peers, and haunted by knowledge of what he had lost. Cressida followed these developments from Valdren Castle, where life had settled into a rhythm of domestic contentment that still sometimes felt like a dream. The months following their triumphant return to Valdren had been peaceful, filled with the simple joys of raising children and building a life together. The twins, Matthias and Seraphine, were thriving. At 2 years old, they were walking, babbling, and displaying personalities as different as night and day. Matthias was serious and observant, with a contemplative gaze that seemed to take in everything around him. Seraphine was all sunshine and mischief, quick to laugh, quicker to cause chaos, absolutely certain that the entire world existed for her entertainment. Stellan adored them both with a fierce, protective love that made Cressida's heart swell every time she witnessed it. Honoria had become a permanent fixture, doting on the twins with grandmotherly enthusiasm, while continuing her campaign to improve Cressida's wardrobe and social calendar. "You're an archduchess now," she reminded regularly. "You must dress like one. I'd rather read in the library like one. You can do both." I certainly did. One autumn day, a letter arrived from England that changed everything. From her sister Marjorie. "Dearest Cressida, I know Father has forbidden us from writing, but I cannot stay silent any longer. What that man did to you was monstrous, and I am ashamed our family played any part in it. The truth is coming out here. Everyone knows now what really happened. Father has been shunned by his former friends, and our family's reputation has suffered greatly, but not because of you, because of him, because of Aldrich and Father's complicity in your mistreatment. I am engaged now to a good man named Edmund Fairfax. He is not wealthy or titled, but he is kind, which I have learned matters far more than status. We are to be married in spring. I would very much like you to come. You are my sister, and I miss you terribly. With all my love, Marjorie." "Do you want to go?" Stellan asked simply when she showed him the letter. "I don't know. England holds so many painful memories, and my father will be there. You faced Aldrich in front of 500 witnesses. I think you can handle your father." He squeezed her hand. "But whatever you decide, I'll support you." So they went to England, to Marjorie's wedding. The ceremony was held at a small country church, intimate, genuine, full of joy, that had been entirely absent from Cressida's own first wedding. Marjorie glowed as she walked toward Edmund, whose face lit up at the sight of her. And then Cressida saw her father. Baron Whitmore stood near the garden doors, looking older than she remembered. His hair had gone entirely gray. He seemed diminished somehow, as if the weight of his choices had physically compressed him. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other across the crowded room. Cressida could walk away. She owed this man nothing. But she found herself moving toward him anyway, not for his sake, but for her own. "Father." "Cressida," his voice cracked. "I didn't think you would come. I almost didn't. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. What I did, how I failed you. You're right. You don't deserve it," she said quietly. "You chose money and social standing over your own daughter. You told me to go quietly while a man who had tried to have me killed planned his next wedding. I was a coward. I was afraid of Aldrich's power. I told myself I was protecting the family, but really I was protecting myself. Yes, you were. Can you ever forgive me?" Cressida considered carefully. Forgiveness wasn't forgetting or excusing. It was choosing not to carry the poison of resentment. "I don't know," she said. "I may never be ready. But I'm willing to try to move forward, for Marjorie's sake and for my own." Her father nodded, tears falling. "That's more than I deserve. The twins are here, your grandchildren. If you can be the kind of grandfather they deserve, present, loving, accountable, then perhaps someday they can know they have family in England." She walked back to Stellan, who wrapped an arm around her waist without asking what had been said. That trust, more than anything, was what made their marriage work. The gardens of Valdrin Castle were ablaze with summer flowers as Cressida watched her children play. Matthias, now 7, was attempting to teach his younger brother Theodoric proper swordplay. Theo, only 3, was more interested in eating grass than learning combat. Seraphine had recruited her 2-year-old sister Honoria, named for her grandmother, who had been insufferably pleased. for a game involving collecting every flower in sight and distributing them to anyone who stood still long enough. 4 children. 4 miracles. "You're looking philosophical," Stellan said, appearing with 2 glasses of lemonade. "I was thinking about how different everything is. 8 years ago, I believed my worth was measured by my ability to produce heirs. That love was something in novels. And now? Now I know a good marriage means partnership, that my worth has nothing to do with my womb. And that love is very real indeed." Stellan pressed a kiss to her hair. "We taught each other." Aldrich Vance had died 2 years prior, a riding accident, the paper said. His title passed to a distant cousin. The name Vance faded into obscurity. Cressida had felt nothing when she heard the news. He had ceased to matter long before he ceased to exist. Her father had died the previous spring, peacefully. Their reconciliation had never been complete, but it had been enough. He had visited Voldrin twice, had held his grandchildren, had told Cressida he was proud of who she had become. Marjorie visited regularly now with Edmund and their growing family. The sisters had rebuilt their relationship carefully, honestly, stronger for having been tested. "Mama! Mama!" Seraphine came running, hands full of crushed flowers. "I picked these for you, all the purple ones." Cressida accepted the wilted bouquet with ceremony. "They're beautiful, darling." "Papa, I picked some for you too, but Theo ate them." "That was very thoughtful regardless," Stellan said gravely. "Can we have cake?" "After dinner. But dinner is forever from now. Life is full of such trials." Cressida exchanged a look with Stellan, both fighting smiles. These were the moments she treasured most. Not grand occasions, but small, ordinary chaos. "I have something for you," Stellan said, producing a velvet box. Inside was a ring, twisted gold set with sapphires. "For surviving, for thriving, for giving me everything I never knew I wanted." She let him slide it onto her finger. "I love you. I love you too. Forever and always." "What's that?" Seraphine demanded. "A reminder that sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things we'll ever have." Seraphine considered this with typical enthusiasm. "Like when Theo broke my toy and Papa got me a better one. Exactly like that." She hopped off to tell Matthias about magic rings. Stellan pulled Cressida closer. Any regrets? She thought about the pain, the betrayals, the long road from disgraced Duchess to beloved Archduchess. Not a single one. Some women, when discarded, simply disappeared. She had returned, stronger, happier, and home at last. Thank you for listening to the very end of this story. If it made you feel something, hope, triumph, or just satisfaction at seeing justice served, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear that the hardest chapters can lead to the happiest endings. Stay tuned for another story waiting at the end of this video. Click, listen, and let your heart soar once more. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for being here.